Good morning, our dear viewers and listeners. Welcome to the Other Perspective, where we try to reflect on the thing behind the thing. My name is Abel Eseru. Today, we are going to be revisiting the journey on the fight against corruption in Africa. We do know Africa has witnessed an alarming increase in corruption activities, which are associated with public servants on one hand, and also the citizens who are the consumers of the public services on the other hand. Corruption has been actualized by loopholes which are inherent in the procedures, temptations, and greed for power and profit, and also erosion of ethical standards in most of these African countries. We do know that most of the state organs which are expected to restrain the increase on corruption have also succumbed to this now so-called pandemic. They have now turned to a pandemic, and this has left people without an option but to always cry and cry out loud. We do know corruption practices span a wide spectrum. They range from petty corruption, whereby bribes are required before normal bureaucratic procedures are accomplished, to large-scale corruption, where considerable sums of money are paid in return for preferential treatment or access. So corruption occurs both in the political, economic, and administrative spheres. Today, I'm going to be joined by three guests who are expertise in this field of corruption, the fight against corruption. The first one is going to be Mr. Ivan Atuyambe. Ivan Atuyambe is a transitional governance and international cooperation practitioner and crusader for youth voices and participation in leadership and development processes. He also doubles as the head of programs and head of leadership and governance academy at Danish Training Center for Development Cooperation, and serves as director for Youth Lead Africa, an African flagship youth leadership program, as well as a curator of Arusha Debates, a high-level policy dialogue space that seeks to highlight pressing African issues that require regional, continental, and global policy attentions and financial investment. He has a background and maintained interest in studying and addressing corruption and other organized economic crimes. Among others, he has worked on assignments for United Nations agencies, African Union, and Transparency International in various parts of Africa in the areas of transnational organized crime and measurement of effectiveness of official development assistance. We shall also be joined by another governance and accountability expert, who is Sophie Chagulanyi. She is a lawyer by profession and seasoned human rights advocate and policy analyst. She has worked with top international and national human rights and governance organizations in the East African community, and she has influenced and formulated and implemented various governance programs, especially on the area of corruption. We shall also be joined by a seasoned anti-corruption fighter known by the names of Felix Kafuma. Felix Kafuma is currently a programs manager at Alliance for Finance Monitoring, and is also a political finance expert, but he has a very good background on the area of fighting corruption, where he used to do the work once when he was working with Anti-Corruption Coalition Uganda, but still up to now is still in the battlefield to make sure that corruption is done out and Africa is a free zone of corruption. So, as we wait for our guests to join, because not all of them have joined us, we need to look at this vice and try to understand it. Ever since Africa came up with some of the instruments on how to fight corruption, we do know that corruption in Africa is now a vice, is now more of a pandemic, whereby people don't even care about who should benefit from the resources. They just steal for their own selfish and their own benefits, and they don't care whether development is going to benefit the rest of the population. Whatever small they want, they take it away from the population and the population suffers, as long as for them and their few chronics are okay. So we are going to take a journey and look at that. And we want to start looking at it from the angle whereby we do remember that in 2003 at the second annual summit of the African Union Assembly, which was held in Maputo in Mozambique, the African Union adopted the African Union Convention on Prevention and Combating Corruption in Africa. So we want to start bringing it from that angle and try to assess ourselves as Africa, as a continent. How have we progressed in terms of fighting corruption? The journey we have walked. How have we walked that journey? Are we walking the journey in the right direction, or we are retrogressively walking back to the days whereby we know everything is messy and there's nothing else we can do? So we need to talk about these issues so that the people in charge of the leadership in African countries can be able to understand that corruption is one of the vices that is making the continent lose a lot of money. Reports have come out saying that annually Africa loses over 140 billion US dollars on corruption. This is a lot of money, and we are asking ourselves, why is it that most of these anti-corruption institutions that have been established, why aren't they interested in trying to make sure that this money that is lost just because of corruption is saved and we use it for other ventures for development? For example, if you look at the report on economic development in Africa of 2020, which was released in the Universal National Conference on Anti-Corruption and Development Trade, it shows that Africa annually loses 88.6 billion on illicit financial flows, which is equivalent to 3.7% of Africa's GDP. Can you imagine? All that is lost on illicit financial flows. And we ask ourselves, why can't we have this money saved? Why can't we have this money saved and we have it invested in development ventures that can benefit all our continent as Africa? So Felix, you're welcome. We other guests have not yet joined us, and I will straight away start with you, since we are running out of time. I will want you to give us a brief background on this pandemic known as corruption, which is now eating up the entire continent of Africa. We do know that at the second annual summit of the African Union, which was held in Maputo, Mozambique in 2003, the African Union adopted the African Union Convention on Prevention and Combating Corruption. And we saw most countries decided to sign towards it, and also they established institutions that were in charge of fighting corruption. From the time that convention was adopted up to now, what is your take on Africa's journey towards the fight of corruption?
Thank you so much, Abel, for inviting me in this space. The journey of Africa in fighting corruption is quite an interesting one, because um, probably we put the cart before the horse. Um, we have taken the path of legislating on corruption, and as a country, but the number of things that define the trajectory of a country in terms of growth, even the countries we admire against which we benchmark the anti-corruption efforts, like the Western countries, they had to go through a journey um, that made them arrive at a certain income status of that nation, so that certain problems, or the problems around corruption, um, were able to be dealt with. I strongly feel that Africa's biggest problem is a leadership problem. Fighting corruption takes leadership. When you look at countries that have taken that path of fighting corruption successfully, like our good friends in the Asian Tigers, you see that the leadership was at the forefront in the fight against corruption. When we come to our nearby country here in Rwanda, I think Rwanda seems to be one of those interesting case studies that stands out. Again, you see the role of leadership in fighting corruption. Now, when we talk about the role of leadership in fighting corruption here, we mean the head of the institution, the head of the country, and all the systems that that head of the country puts in place to ensure that corruption is fought. Africa's biggest challenge at the moment is that we do not have committed leaders to fight corruption. Many of them appear to be doing something about fighting corruption, to tick the boxes, to appear to be fulfilling the minimum requirements of a democratic state that is open and transparent, and probably some even want to be in the good books of because of the geopolitics, because we are now more of a global, we are into a we are globally connected. You try to dress up for the occasion, but when someone really removes those clothes from you, you do not, you are naked. They don't believe in it. First of all, many of them are in power through because somehow corruption played a part. Then also many of them are in power because corruption continues to play a part to sustain them in power. So to them, corruption is a tool to capture power, a tool to stay in power, a tool to maintain power, and a tool to sustain their existence. So you can't tell me that someone who is benefiting from corruption can in any way uh, be very committed to fight corruption. So for me, the discussion about corruption, whether it's a moral argument, whether it's a legislative argument, whether it's a normative argument, whatever theory will advance, including the latest of our good friend Betty Olive Namisango Kamia, the current IG, is that at the end of it all, without the leadership of the without the leadership, it becomes very difficult to conclusively and decisively fight corruption, and that's what Africa misses. It's across board.
Thank you so much, Felix, for that background of how corruption is more of nowadays a tool to capture and also sustain leadership among some of the politicians and governments in Africa, which is quite true because most of the reports are highlighting most of the corruption is being conducted by those politically exposed persons, and the local citizens, these other citizens down, even don't know how sophisticated corruption is. I'm seeing Sophie is trying to connect, and I wanted her to, to chip in from there, as from where you've stopped. Sophie, are you hearing me? Hello, Sophie. You're welcome. Sophie Chagulanyi, can you hear me? Maybe as Sophie is still trying to connect, you just brought a very good example of Betty Olive Kamya. But before we go to her, we do know that corruption in Africa, right, as you've rightly put it, it's more of a tool that is used to capture and sustain the existence of most of the regimes in African countries. And nowadays, those regimes have become too smart and they have made corruption in African countries become sophisticated in that now they plan it, they budget it, they allocate and execute it. So if they plan the entire process from the planning up to the execution level, if the entire process of how to swindle and steal money is now a process that is planned very well in a smart and sophisticated way, it's systematic in that most of the processes are followed, and you cannot even easily stress it. How feasible is a fight against corruption in such a context where all the processes are being followed, but you see the money is taken, and you ask yourself, but they have followed almost the entire process which is required, but you don't see any development in place. But you see money is being spent in billions and billions budgeted for, but there's nothing tangible you can see out of the money that is being budgeted for most countries in terms of their financial budgets. How feasible is a fight against corruption in such a context, Felix?
You see, when you institutionalize corruption, and that's what just been saying, how you almost legalize it without necessarily saying that you've legalized it. So it becomes a normative and a practice, and along the way, what initially was a moral issue, because it is practiced over time. You know, when you practice something over time, um, conscience and morality loses its hold over you. So when it comes to fighting corruption within a context of within a context of institutionalized corruption, for example, it only takes drastic measures like the ones we saw in the Asian tigers, which we keep talking about. You cannot, institutions can't fight that type of corruption. Individuals can't fight that kind of corruption. It only takes a strong, very strong leader who becomes very intolerant and takes leadership and unilaterally punishes severe punishments without fear or favor those who engage in corruption. And unfortunately, because of the fact that it's a weapon to sustain regimes, you don't see someone taking that path. Institutional corruption, unfortunately, is the corruption that supports and helps political corruption thrive. The only type of fighting of corruption you will be able to see will be the fighting of corruption that is more or less bureaucratic. And I think you've been seeing our good friend, Honorable Ogwang, in the eastern region trying to squeeze a couple of individuals over issues to do with accountability. That is bureaucratic corruption. That one, the institutions can do something about it because it's the way it is designed and structured. It favors institutional frameworks to do something about it. But when it graduates, but remember, we most of the monies we lose to corruption of late now is not through bureaucratic corruption. It's through political corruption. So, but when it that now you have more of political corruption in a country, it means that it's corruption has now gotten out of hand, out of control for institutions to contain, out of control for even society. Because when you talk about society, the relationship between society and institutions, that these institutions usually are crafted in the way that they make use of resources from society. And society tends to gravitate towards the ways the institutions are structured. And because institutional corruption is so strong, it starts to now incorporate even society itself. And when you talk about society, you're talking about here the normatives, the values. You are talking about opinion leaders. You're talking about cultural leaders. How they become co-opted in this institutional framework that supports corruption. And when you are at that point, it means that the moral high ground can no longer hold you accountable. Institutions can no longer hold you accountable. And it only takes a very strong leader to come and become and is very uncompromising in the fight against corruption to get rid of that kind of corruption. So, in the context of Uganda and in the context of Africa, fighting political corruption is almost close to impossible because of the nature and character of the leaders we have, first, but also because it's through corruption that these leaders sustain themselves in power. They need it.
Thank you so much, Felix. Ivan, thanks for joining us. You've just joined us when Felix was trying to give us his argument on how corruption now it's more of a tool that most people in power use to capture those who come in use it to capture power and also sustain themselves in power. So fighting is it's like fighting them out of power, and also the institutions they have established do not necessarily have the motive of fighting corruption and doing away with it, but it's just more of a camera tricks of showing people that they're in place to fight corruption, but naturally they are not doing the fighting the real war. So I want to bring you on board, Ivan, here. We do know that, like in the current context of Uganda, the Inspector of General of Government, Betty Olive Kamya, believes that the face of corruption must be profiled, and people must know how it looks so that they take the lead in the fight against corruption. Who do you think should take the lead in the fight against corruption in the African continent? Should it be the people? Should it be the politicians or the technocrats who are in charge of those institutions? Ivan, are you there? I think Ivan also has network problems. Hello, Ivan. I think we have challenges of network with other guests. We can continue with you, Felix. Felix, you can respond to that very question. Whom do you think should take the lead in the war against corruption?
And a very interesting question and very interesting proposition from the IGG because when you now throw you throw the ball to the people to fight corruption, it means that you've conceded that the institutions themselves cannot fight corruption. So you will now need to rely. The current IGG is raising what we call the moralist argument that you let the court you allow the moral court take charge in the fight against corruption. But the challenge with the moral court is that it also you have to ask yourself what is our current society, because when you discuss morality you are discussing society and its values and norms. Our current society, which has evolved, we are talking about a society which has evolved, inspired, and along the way, I think Ivan is there, and along the way assumed the characteristics of the corrupt regime. A society that has been that more or less has been birthed out of a corrupt process, to the extent that majority of the young persons today, when you talk about, because the society now is made up of mainly young persons, they have grown up in a culture where the end justifies the means. You do whatever it takes to make the money. The process doesn't matter at all. As long as you make the money, whether you steal that money, you don't have to be accountable. I mean, you are talking about a society. The society you are running to is a society that has been birthed out of, for about 25 years or 30 years, out of a process that is highly corruptible, that is highly corrupt, sorry. How do you then expect such a society to fight corruption? You've always heard about how young graduates talk about their ambitions about making money and why they would want to work for government, and also we've seen how society has defended the thieves, contrary to the normative of how culture, society should safeguard the good values and actually punish the corrupt. It's now protecting the corrupt. It's now hailing the corrupt. It's now promoting the corrupt. This is our own thief. You've heard about that saying, he's our own thief. Yes, he's a thief, but he's our own thief. That shows you how society has changed over time. And that shows you how you do not have a society that can, in actual sense, fight corruption. Because the society does not know any better. So, should we throw the fight to the society to fight corruption? In my own honest opinion, looking at the society that we are throwing the fight to doesn't have what it takes to fight corruption. Back to you.
Thank you, Felix, for that. Now I'll bring Ivan. Can you now hear me very well? Good morning, Ivan. Can you get me, Ivan? Hello, Ivan. Are you getting me? All right. I think Ivan has a connection problem. We shall get back to him. Let's first go for a brief break, then we shall return.
Pocket.com.
Welcome everyone from that break. Today we are discussing about revisiting the journey on anti-corruption fight in Africa. We are joined by Mr. Felix Kafuma, who is a political finance expert. And also we are expecting other guests who are having technical issues to also join us. That's Ivan Atuyambe and Sophie Chagulanyi. Before we went for that break, Felix, you were putting it across that neither do the people have the tools and knowledge when it comes to the fight against corruption. So putting them at the forefront,
They don't have the motivation.
And the motivation. So putting them at the forefront of corruption is just like the government is trying to say that, if for us we have failed, do you think you can also make it? You try and see. So it's like you're already throwing a span against the proposal by the current IG that her strategy may not successfully work because the people she's trying to throw the fight back to already also have issues For example, most of them have been complaining that each time they try reporting cases about the offenders of the corrupt to some of these institutions, some of those authorities don't take these cases seriously, and they tend to ignore some of the cases, especially when it comes to top officials. They tend not to follow up on those cases, and they choose to follow up on the small fish, but the big fish are always ignored. So I want to bring Ms. Sophie Chagulanyi here. Felix has just been alluding to the fact that corruption, we need a concerted effort to fight corruption, both from the side of the people, government institutions, and also the political leaders themselves. But we are in a scenario whereby some of these institutions, it's like they have given up. If you listen to the current Inspector General of Government of Uganda, that is Olive Betty Kamia, she said that she wants to bring the war of corruption to be led by the people themselves. She wants to profile it, and the people understand how that pandemic looks like, so that they take charge in the fight against this corrupt. Do you think the people are in the better position to lead that fight? Yet, oftentimes they have complained that each time they report cases on corruption, government doesn't do anything on the people they report to them about who are corrupt. Hello, Sophie, are you on? Wow, wow, wow. Technology in Africa is something else. So we are not so surprised with technological issues which we are interfacing with. Now, Felix, there's a report that was released in 2020 by the economic development in Africa. It was on the National Convention on Trade and Development, which reports that every year an estimate of 88.9 billion, which is equivalent to 3.7% of Africa's GDP, leaves the continent as illicit capital flight. Now we are talking about fighting corruption. And when we talk of illicit capital flight, we have seen the papers like the Panama Papers, the Pandora Papers, and also the Luxembourg leaks. They have pinpointed that some of the people who are engaged in this kind of illicit capital flights are politically exposed persons. And those include the politicians and those high-ranking officials in government institutions on the technocratic level. Do you think these people can save Africa of this loss of about 89 billion US dollars annually? Do you think they are ready to take the journey of working the fight against corruption, yet they are the beneficiaries of this vice? Can they save Africa of that money which moves out as illicit financial flows out of the country, out of the continent, I mean?
What is interesting is that illicit financial flows, for example, from the continent of Africa, is usually done with the aid or with the support of the Western states. Not Western states as countries per se, but with individuals or companies or multinational companies in the Western states. It's because these people usually that money, that illicit flight of such resources, it's it's from Africa to those countries that provide safe haven and with systems that support that support and also protect um, um, this what has been actually stolen from Africa. They take advantage of the fact that Africans are gullible, Africans are greedy, and Africans, you know, an African, unfortunately, we even fight ourselves. We fight each other. For the white man, it's business, but for an African, it's a loss. Now, you also understand the politics around how those multinational companies and in those countries where we have flight of resources works that is that most of these African leaders, they are also able to stay in power because they can allow the interests of these foreign countries to thrive in Africa. Part of those interests is to steal resources. But in the process of stealing resources from Africa, also the Africans exploit avenues of how do we also now, as resources are stolen from Africa to these other states, can we also steal part of those resources and hide them into these other states? So these other countries that are supporting or abating illicit financial flow of capital flight from Africa um, are also equally to blame. They have a part and they are part and parcel of the problems that you are talking about. And there's so much in terms of the gain from this kind of situation. In exchange, they guarantee and support these regimes that provide opportunities, that provide protection, that provide that haven for the for the resources to be siphoned from Africa to their countries. So you are in a situation where these are the same institutions, these are the same states that give you templates to domesticate in form of laws. But they know very well that these templates have gaps that they can exploit. And they also know very well that Africans don't have whatever it takes to implement uh, these good documents that we are supposed to domesticate in form of instruments to safeguard and protect, for example, as you put it up, as you say it, the illicit financial flow of resources, for example. They know very well that we don't have whatsoever, we don't have the capacity to stop the illicit financial flows. We don't have the commitment because we are part and parcel of the flow, and we do not have uh, the support to ensure that we actually do stop the flow of illicit financial flow of resources from Africa to these states. So you find ourselves as a continent in a situation whereby um, we are fighting a war that one probably is not even our war, because when you look at the actors in that war, it's not necessarily our war per se, but also we are fighting a war where we do not have the capacity to fight that war and we do not have the commitment to fight that war. So whether the illicit financial flow in Africa is a war that can be fought conclusively, I think we can only uh, mitigate or minimize how much, but we cannot fight that war because this is all that draws in foreign states, draws in foreign companies, draws in multinational companies that actually support African states to steal from their own and hide the money in those other states where they earn tax, all interest, all they earn business. That's where we are.
Thank you, Felix. I'm trying to relate your argument of how the individuals and multinational companies in those some of those Western countries connive or support some of the politicians and also the corrupt in Africa to make sure that they steal and plunder the resources and enrich themselves at the expense of developing the country. Could there be a relation whereby after these people have supported the locals in terms of maybe giving them the resources they need in terms of capacity building on how they should play around and make sure that they steal and that money goes safely? Don't you think doesn't that money have a way where it returns back and ends up financing some of the campaigns of these politicians? Because if you are in a game, you want to play the game with players you know better, who can be able to make sure that you win each and every game. So you don't need to change the team that is winning with you. So each time that team goes for an election, you make sure you have to support it and give it all what that it requires. Don't you think the corrupt individuals and multinational companies, since they want to continue with their motives of plundering the resources from the continent, are also liaising with those people. They are the main financiers of some of these politicians in elections.
The politics in Africa and world at large usually revolves around what we call interests. And it's usually the gravity and of the interest that determines um, the the financing of the political structure to be in power. I can tell you for sure that when the mutual interest cease, it is as good as being out of power. So African states know very well that they cannot stay in power without having mutual interests with the foreign powers. Now, foreign powers, when we talk about foreign powers or foreign countries, we're not talking about countries per se. Those countries uh, are also they also run on interests of individuals. There are powerful individuals who determine the foreign policy of, for example, of US. And usually the foreign policy of US has a lot of economic arguments, economic motivations. So it's democracy is a very secondary issue when we're discussing politics. In actual sense, uh, politics is supposed to serve interests of individuals. Democracy is just a cover up. When it comes to the politics of Africa, there are individuals, there are companies, there are multinational companies, there are that determine and define the structure of leadership in Africa, who should be the head of that state. And the definition of who should be the head of that state and the choice is also determined by how far can he or she either serve our interests or protect our interests. The moment you cease to serve and protect the interests that are usually commercial interests, because Africa, as it was then, so it is now, Africa is a source of factors of production. It's a source of, it's, for them, it's a place where they pick resources to run their economies. So because that's how it is, and we partly were discussing what we call a political economy, because that's how it is, they will also determine how they finance the politics in that state and who they finance to be in power, to service, to protect, to maintain their interests. So the question you are asking is that is there a relationship between the money siphoned from Africa ending up financing the politics of Africa? In actual sense, I can tell you this categorically that the politics in Africa is financed by resources that have been stolen from Africa, taken to other countries where those individuals I'm talking about and companies are. And they now come back in different ways, in different forms, and they finance the politics either directly or indirectly. They can finance it indirectly through the taxes they give to that state, uh, through the donations they give to that state, uh, through the grants they give to that state, in many ways. But behind the motive of giving or supporting or financing, they are doing that because they need that political structure to be in power to protect their interests or to sustain their interests. And when that relationship dies, they start to fight that individual. You've had the head of state continuously make noise about the foreign powers and telling them to get out of our politics, not to meddle in our politics. That argument is not far-fetched. Unfortunately, at some point they supported him and they nurtured him because he was probably fulfilling their conditions. He was the conduit. But the moment you cease to play fiddle with them, then they start fighting you. So that's how the foreign powers keep their foot in Africa. It's business. For them, it's business, purely business. Democracy is just a cover up.
Yo, thanks so much, that Felix. I'm told Eddie Kinda is going to be joining us shortly since the network of the other colleagues have not been well. So I don't know whether he's on. Patra, is Eddie on? Because I would like him to respond to one of these questions I have. Since we do know that Africa loses about 100 and Eddie, welcome.
Thank you,
Now,
Abel.
this is yours. As from your economic perspective, you as an economist,
Mm.
we have seen reports pointing out that Africa annually loses over 140 billion US dollars on corruption. And we want to understand from you what is the implication of that on Africa's development from your own
Thank you,
economic
uh,
angle.
thank you, Abel. First of all, I'm happy that I'm engaging in this space and contributing to this discussion. One of the things we must know is that there is no theory or history that has told us that any country can develop when it is massively undergoing corruption, like the case is in Uganda. When we had the IGG survey last week telling us that Uganda is losing 20 trillion shillings in corruption. Everybody was in shock. And I can assure you, if that figure is to go by, I really don't think we are anywhere, any inch towards achieving the so-called middle income status. But to answer your question, for as long as you're engaging in a country where there's no frugality and efficiency in the way we manage national resources, then we cannot actively engage in production. Uh, Economic production presupposes that the available resources that we do have as a country are used in a more economic way to ensure that we can have optimum production points for each of the resources that we do invest in production. And secondly, when you look at the input-output relationships, what does government put in and what do we get out of our own production processes? You shall realize that there is an inverse relationship between what we put in and what we get out. We have realized that we put in so much, but the return on investment is so little that you can hardly quantify it. Look at the roads, look at the schools, look at the health facilities, look at the infrastructure sector. We have put in so much, but we have gotten out so less. Therefore, when you say that we are losing that much in corruption, the trend is aimed at it shall remain the same for as long as we do not apply the principles of efficiency, the principles of frugality, but the principles of analyzing what we should be getting out as return on what we invest. And I can attribute that to the leadership problem. Africa has a huge leadership problem. And in Uganda specifically, whereas the president has been, the rhetoric has been, I'm fighting corruption week in, week out, term in, term out, the system around him seems to have failed him. And I think it has gotten to a level where we need a structural change in leadership, a structural change in governance. And this shall always come up when we can have people's revolt, when people can come out and say, enough is enough. We must put in, we must bring on board persons and leaders that are sufficiently educated or sufficiently civically aware of what is happening, people that can drive us towards a corruption-free state like our partners or our friends in the Asian Tigers. Thank you, Abel.
Eddie, I want to bring you back. I want to hear your views about some of these elites. There are elites who analogically reason out that If someone engages in corruption and steals money and then reinvests that money back to the economy, that person is contributing indirectly to the development of that country. Is better than someone who steals the money and takes it outside the country and keeps it. What are your thoughts on that? Don't you think some of those elites are encouraging the,
You see, Abel,
the spread of the pandemic called corruption?
we have what we call a moral hazard. At one point, it is a hazard, but at another point, it comes out to benefit the persons that are engaged in that kind of circle, if at all the intentions were right. If we had persons that steal money, I'm going to use the word steal contextually. If you had people steal money and use this money to invest in markets, invest in production, invest in a high level sectors that provide employability potential and self-employment, probably would say, okay, let them take it, but they are investing it back in our own country. But the problem there is in Africa is that whenever Africans steal money, they take it to Europe, they take it to USA, they take it to the Arab world, and we have a lot and lots of money drifting away from Africa to the foreign countries, and Africa is at a loss. I can give you an example. During the COVID time, there is a rhetoric that one of the buildings along Gayaza Road is a product of COVID monies. But that facility, to me, is employing people. I'm not condoning that it should somebody should have stolen that money, but if at all that facility was built, say in Abu Dhabi, would lose it out. But if it is brought back home, or it's benefiting the masses, it's benefiting the people, would say that would have a better moral hazard. But if you're taking it back outside the country, then I wouldn't allow that. But that should not, I should not be mistaken to mean that people should steal and invest in our country. No. Money must be invested in a manner that benefits the nation, benefits the people, and benefits the stakeholders. Yes.
Thank you so much, Eddie, for that.
Yes,
Felix, you've just had Eddie's thoughts on some of the so-called, may I say, I call them elites in quotes, who claim that it's okay to steal so long as you're stealing to invest back that money in the country. But the question is, why do you steal from the government or the government pool and bring it to your own individual pool and use it to invest, which will benefit you for your entire life and also your family? Why don't you allow government to use that money, invest, and it benefits the greater nation at large, instead of you first stealing it, you invest it, and then there are so-called elites who come and justify that it's okay to steal so long as you invest back that money in your very country? What are your thoughts on some of the views of such elites? Unmute.
I've had that argument before, and at some point, I think even Andrew Mwenda tried to qualify a corrupt economy. A corrupt economy, how it can somehow be beneficial, as opposed to the normative argument of the evils of corruption. And I think for me, I find it quite it's quite unfortunate that there are elites who are advancing that argument. First of all, you are stealing public resources. You are stealing taxpayers' money. It's not your money. Morally, it's wrong. But even if I remove the moral, if I discounted the moral argument, it's wrong. You are stealing public resources, but you're not investing those resources into a public good. there's a difference. If they were stealing to construct public hospitals, or if they were stealing to put drugs in public hospitals, if they were stealing to finance teachers in public facilities, in public schools, if they were stealing to construct public roads, probably we would revisit that argument. But someone is stealing and is investing in an apartment,
Apartment.
and the proceeds coming from that investment go to his or her pockets, not to the public coffers. So I don't understand how one argues then that it's benefiting the economy. It's, unfortunately, in Uganda we have redefined what we call a growing economy. We have redefined our economy to be growing just by looking at the arcades mushrooming, the apartments mushrooming. That is not, that is still consumptive expenditure. You are not investing that money in things that produce more resources. Those are non-productive areas. Then people who are stealing are not putting up industries, for example, to employ majority of Ugandans who are unemployed. They're not putting up structures like they're not putting up social goods, for example, to employ. They are investing this money in real estate. Many of them invest this money in real estate. Now, real estate benefits a few. So I, for me even to be making an argument on the position of elites, those elites that advance the notion that uh, corruption can be beneficial if you steal and invest within the country. The question is, you're investing what? If you are investing in personal goods, then you are not benefiting the economy. That argument doesn't hold water whatsoever.
Thank you so much. We are running out of time, so I want to give each of you one minute to give your parting shots, and we conclude with this show. I will start with you, Eddie.
Thank you, Abel. Corruption is bad. There's no country that can develop when the leaders, the persons are corrupt. In Uganda, corruption has been taken to be normal. And Ugandans have now come to believe that everywhere you go, even if you're accessing a public service, a public service facility, you must pay. I have one person who works in one of the national health facilities, but she tells me that when a patient comes in, before you even line up to get treatment, the patient first comes with money and tells you, Musao, what can we do to ensure that we, it has come to that level to for everybody to think that corruption is normal, and we must access services through a corrupt system. But secondly, I want to argue that corruption should be given a face, and persons must be consciously uh, brought into knowledge through information, through education, through communication, to know the different phases of corruption, and engage the masses, engage the public in ensuring that they can report, they can follow up cases of corruption, so that we can be able to avert corruption from that perspective. Because we seem to have lost it from the leadership perspective until the goals come to us. I'm not sure that the path of having the best leaders and as far as averting corruption is concerned can work. Let us take the fight to the masses, and God will help us get out of this challenge. I thank you.
You subscribe to the analogy of the current IGG. Okay, Felix, give us your parting shot.
Yes, I have subscribed to that analogy.
Contrary to my colleague Eddie, I don't believe that the fight against corruption can be fought by society, because society has been socialized to be part and parcel of corruption. They either abate or support or protect or benefit from corruption in one way or another. So society is not the best option to run to fight corruption. I strongly believe the fight against corruption, the leadership has to take, and when I say this, let me even be categorically clear. The head of the state, His Excellency, the executive of this government, has to take leadership in fighting corruption and sanction and punish those who are corrupt, including those that are perceived to be his own.
But
Lastly,
he has failed.
and if he fails, we shall continue to talk about it. And lastly, nobody does not know that corruption is bad. Actually, everybody knows that corruption is bad, even those who participate in corruption. That's why when they are stealing, no one steals openly. Even those Ed is talking about that access public services and are lining up, they do not talk in confidence that I have money, come and work on me. They take you on the side, they whisper in your ear to tell you they know conscious that what they're doing is wrong. It's just that their conscience has been seared to the point that whether it is wrong, they continue to do it. So it's no longer an issue of creating awareness, no longer an issue of creating sensitization. It's an issue of acting decisively against the corrupt. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time, Felix and Eddie. It has been an interesting show. I want to also thank our viewers and listeners outside there. And I want to tell you that the fight against corruption is everyone's responsibility. It will start from those above and also it will come down. So it's a bottom-up approach, a top-down approach. It doesn't be, I don't believe also in the bottom-up approach where we start from those people on the lower side who don't have the tools and also the necessary knowledge, and some of them are also not well versed with how the face of corruption really looks like. So let's take the fight against corruption. Let it be everybody's responsibility, and let's not just leave it to the leaders, because some of these leaders are beneficiaries of that very vice or the pandemic. Thank you so much. Catch up with us again next Wednesday, same time, from 11 to 12 noon East African time. Thank you.